U.S. Senate panel amends bill to state that criticism of Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. And the Republican chair of committee charges that amendment led by Bernie Sanders, which passes 12-11 with the help of GOP's Rand Paul. So you never know where your unlikely bedfellow is going to come from. It's an effort to kill the Antisemitism Awareness Act. This I was really surprised that it tipped the scale in this way and was, in essence, a win for free speech. But please, I welcome your thoughts on this.
So first of all, I believe that there are so many different layers to this conversation. But I will just say, really, just like definitively with this, it's a really dangerous territory to try to conflate that.
Yes.
Condemning the actions of a government are the same as hate speech against a particular ethnic group.
100%.
And it makes no sense to me that language was ever in a bill in the first place. I mean, what is trying to be created here? And the funny thing to me is that this was like 12-11 votes, which means that it almost stayed in, right? I mean, the idea behind, and this is actually on party lines. So the only person who flipped was Rand Paul. So the Republicans, in large part, are trying to create this idea that if you speak out against what is happening with Netanyahu's government, whatever the government is doing, that is the exact same thing as anti-Semitism. That is absolutely insane. That's absolutely insane. Could you imagine if someone said that, like, if you were speaking out against Trump, for instance, and his government, that'd be the same as like committing a hate crime or something to that effect, right? Like you would just lose your mind. You're like, no, you are criminalizing dissent against a government.
Yes.
That is a direct infringement on free speech. I don't even understand how that could be legal, first of all. So I am very glad that this
we don't care about that anymore. No.
Yes, apparently we're in new territory.
Please.
This is full-blown fascism. So as I'm sitting here trying to like grapple with how this even existed in the first place, I am very happy to see that it's not going to exist. But the problem here is that so many of these members wanted it to be in this bill. Tells me that we're not safe from it maybe existing again in some form in the future. And so that's what really is concerning to me, as we are seeing so many different attempts around the country. That's not just in this. We're also seeing that certain nonprofits have kind of been told that if they have certain stances that they will lose their funding. Schools are being told that if demonstrations are happening on their campuses that they could lose their funding. So we are seeing so many different ways that which criticizing a particular government is Israel's government, just point blank right here, that is just not going to be okay, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it sounds like. And it's very dangerous territory. It's incredibly dangerous territory. I know a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about this, about whether, how they feel about the nation of Israel, how they feel about the people of Palestine. I got to tell you, just taking all of those things aside, as American people, if we are told that we cannot criticize another nation's government for whatever actions they are committing, that is a direct infringement on free speech. And anybody who's trying to make sure that is a reality in our country, as far as I'm concerned, they should not be in elected office.
Yeah. And it's also indirectly going to impact your freedom to assemble as well. It's also going to impact freedom of the press, because if you can't report on that, if you can't talk to someone with an opposing opinion on something like what is going on in Gaza, then you no longer have a free press. You have a mouthpiece for one particular government. And it, once again, it very much solidifies this experience of authoritarianism in the United States. And Bernie said, and this is from the Times of Israel, this article that I'm reading. Bernie said, one can criticize the government of Israel for their policies without being anti-Semitic. He said, this amendment makes it clear that it is not anti-Semitic to oppose the Netanyahu-led war effort that has killed more than 50,000 people and wounded over 116,000, 60% whom are women, children, and the elderly. And we have a comment here from Gregory Bally. He says, Netanyahu regime can't possibly represent all Jews, just as Trump regime doesn't ever represent all Americans. GOP is craven and authoritarian. And 100% agree. I think Desmond, sometimes I think the trap that we fall into, you and I, is I still think we think that the government is supposed to work for the people. And like, this government that we have, that is not what they're doing. And they're actually not pretending to do that. And they've been very clear about their goals. And that's why we didn't vote for this. So the fact that half the country, a little less than half, did vote for it, and Trump managed to win because of the electoral map yet again, it really does tell you we've been sliding in this direction for a really long time. But the process of this has been expedited because of what has happened in Gaza. And I just want to remind everybody that regardless of your religious affiliation, how you feel about the geopolitical experiences over there is nothing wrong with saying two things can be true. You can say what happened that day was wrong, and you can also say what has happened since to those people of Gaza is also wrong. I feel like a lot of times we're not allowed to speak as if both of these things aren't happening at the same time, or that both of these experiences of these people aren't both valid. And it's like, you can hold space for both and say we should not be bombing children. Like that, to me, it doesn't negate what happened that day either. And I don't think a lot of times we're allowed to speak on the nuances of that. And bills like this, to me, further create that binary experience that try to make it seem so black and white when we know it's not, in terms of how people feel about it. So there is a little bit of that too here at play, that we're somehow not allowed to talk about one person or one group of people's pain. And I don't understand that. I don't understand that at all.
I'm going to be very clear about how I feel about this, Natalie.
Mm-hmm.
I think Benjamin Netanyahu is a fascist.
Absolutely.
Like, even more so than Donald Trump. And that's saying something, even given everything that we've said about Donald Trump. I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is actually even a more dangerous leader of his country than Donald Trump is. And so what has happened here? Because of the fact that we do allow foreign governments to have influence over our government.
So much influence.
Is, the government of Israel has legally, mind you, lobbied members of our Congress in order to make sure that there are favorable conditions for them here in America, so they can continue to have a good view of their government here in America, so that they can continue to get funding and protections from our taxpayer dollars and from our military. Now, to this effect, what Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to create here in America is a situation for himself and for his government that no matter what his actions are over in his part of the world, that if anyone criticizes it here in America, they will be attacked for it. They will be condemned for it. And in some cases, they might be absolutely, they might be deported out of this country for it, as we saw with, Mahmoud Khalil. So we are seeing essentially an authoritarian crackdown at the behest of one Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes.
He is trying to impose fascism over here in an increased fashion that benefits what he's doing over there.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I cannot say strongly enough just how dangerous this is.
I agree.
He is essentially trying to infiltrate our own governments and criminalize speech that is against what he's doing. Because at the end of the day, there is never anything wrong with criticizing a government.
No. Period.
I don't care where the government is. I don't care who makes up the government. I don't care, where this government is. It doesn't matter. You are allowed to criticize the government. Everyone in this country should be able to criticize the government. And I think that Benjamin Netanyahu, as far as I'm concerned, everyone needs to be criticizing his government. His own people are criticizing him. There are protests to get him out of office from his own people.
I know.
Like almost every single week over there anymore. So let's not pretend that this is actually some beloved figure who's being attacked by some radical cult. Like, he deserves everything that's coming his way.
Oh, 100%. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I just think that when you try to put this stuff into writing and deny people the opportunity to express how they're feeling and stand against tyranny in all of its forms, you're not allowing space. You're not allowing emotional space for the death and destruction and the lack of humanity that this situation has caused. And then you create spaces where people hide in the shadows and aren't able to talk freely about how they're feeling. Because I think at the heart of all of this, whether it's what's happening in Gaza, whether it's what happened with the pandemic, whether it's what happened with Trump's reelection, this country in particular really sucks at dealing with collective grief. And so we wear these masks. And so we've put on these masks of anger to hide our grief because we haven't dealt with the pain, with the death, with the destruction, and how all of these things intertwine. And behind all of that grief is what is really at the heart of all of this, which is fear, and a fear of not being seen and heard in our full humanity. So bills like this, if these things were to pass, in my opinion, they only create more of that groundwork being laid where you cannot speak around grief or fear. And the only way you're allowed to react is through anger. And we have another comment from this person, Hirut, who says, my vote depends on what is fair to humanity and all human dignity and all freedom. And I think that's a really important point too, that we all deserve dignity. And when you put these kinds of rules in place where you're no longer allowed to criticize a government that is stripping people of their humanity and of their dignity and of their right to exist, what are you left with? What are you left with?
That's a great question, Natalie. I think before we transition away from this topic, I do want to say that I haven't really done this too much on here, but I wanted to give a recommendation out there for those who are interested in learning more about like the details on the ground of what's happening over there. There's a great publication here on Substack that does, just really intensive detailing of what's going on over there. They're called Drop Site News, being headed up by by journalist Ryan Grimm, who used to be at The Intercept. Fantastic work that's being done by Drop Site News. I highly recommend checking out what they're doing. They're on Substack. They have a huge following on here. But if you're not already, subscribe to them. And I would say that it will become very transparent about the current state of what's happening over in Gaza and over in Israel as well.
Well, and I want to add to that, because once again, I just want to make these connections between what happened with the pandemic and what is currently still happening with the pandemic and what is happening with Gaza, because this same thing happened with the Spanish flu, and which led to the rise of the Nazis. You can't have one without the other. And the idea that we had a pandemic that killed millions of people and is disabling more, it laid this groundwork for saying some people are worthy and some people are not. Some people deserve to live and some people don't. And this lack of care, community care, is why we are so desensitized to then what we have been seeing happen on our feeds for 2 years with very little action. And so I just want to make sure we understand that like these things don't exist in silos. The timing of what's going on right now, this deliberate and intentional bombing, it had to happen following a mass disabling event in the United States. It had to. Because it's happened before this way in history, and it will happen again if we don't put a stop to it. So once again, let's be aware of how we're looking at one another and trying to see each other in our full humanity, because it really does make a difference. And to dovetail off of what you were just talking about with these bills, it's really important that we understand that we have to be very aware of what is going on with the political spaces in the United States, to your point, right? Because fascism has taken root here in large part because of how we've allowed Netanyahu and his fascist regime to influence American politics. And we're seeing it again.